making more as much as you can, making more with less. So whatever you have, making the most out of it. Question of finding a voice, that's a hard question to answer. There's no formula. What I always talk about is I think you have to go through what you love. If you're honest with yourself about what you like, sometimes you like things that aren't cool. Sometimes you like things that maybe aren't popular. I mean, sometimes you like things that are popular, but it can cut both ways, but you have to be honest about your influences and what really speaks to you.
When you change your composition form and then maybe upgrade it into a dance form, concert form, did those process change the way you think about compositions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've been able to work with dance in a number of different contexts, and I love collaborating with dancers and choreographers. It's a wonderful process. There's two types. One is if a choreographer engages a piece of music I've already written, and they use that music for their own purpose. And then there's a type of collaboration where we create a new piece together. So with Soul House, they choreographed to the pre-existing work. So I didn't change anything about the music. They reacted to the music, which is always fascinating because you learn so much about your piece when you see how other people respond to it, like especially people in different artistic mediums. So whether it be dance or film or some other thing, that's really interesting for me as the composer because they will have their own response, their own insights. But I have had other projects where I've worked with a choreographer to create a piece from the beginning. And that's been really fun because that's a very collaborative process where you're talking about concepts, you're talking about the form, you're talking about narrative and structure.
I'm wondering in the piece in Economy of Means, does any of your members give some feedbacks to this album?
No, that was a solo project, but it was collaborative, and I can talk a little bit more about that. So Economy of Means for solo vibraphone, prepared vibraphone, it was commissioned by Doug Perkins and a consortium of almost 40 other percussionists. So I knew that there were a lot of percussionists that were going to ultimately play this piece, and I really wanted to write something that would appeal to them. And so I worked really closely with Doug, who's an incredible percussionist and an incredible collaborator and advocate for new music. He's done amazing collaborations with John Luther Adams, with Michael Gordon, with many other composers. He now teaches at Michigan. He was a founding member of So Percussion. So he has so much experience working with composers and was an incredible person to work on this piece with. And we had a very collaborative process where I would write drafts and I would send it to him and he would give me feedback. I mean, sometimes I'd send him a whole draft, or sometimes I'd just send him 2 measures and just say, hey, how does this look to you? Do you think this is going to work? And he would say yes or no, or he would make suggestions. And we really worked very closely, collaboratively, to try to make that piece just be as effective as it possibly could be. And yeah, I think I'm really happy with how it turned out. Yeah.
The name of the album actually is in economic terms, right?
Yeah, Economy of Means.
Yeah, so what does it draw to and play music?
So yeah, it does. There is the economic illusion, but there's also an artistic side, and it's just the idea of making more as much as you can, making more with less. So whatever you have, making the most out of it. And I've always been fascinated with that idea. Yeah. I guess less is more is kind of the saying. And so with that piece, I'm just using a vibraphone, right? And I have just some simple preparations. Sometimes you have paper on it, sometimes you have foil on it, sometimes you're hitting like different sides of the instrument. But with these small modifications, preparations, I'm trying to evoke a large world of sound. And I'm also trying to, through the piece itself, I'm trying to create this really big structure. And so I like the idea of this single instrument that maybe is more limited than, say, a piano, but through these preparations and really doing as much as I can with the things I had, that I could create this much larger sonic palette, this much larger musical narrative. So the title kind of refers to this idea. It also refers to, I think, just how I'm specifically using musical material. In my style of writing, I love to do as much as I can with as little as possible. I gravitate towards this feeling of like, let's take the smallest idea I have and just see what I can do with it. How much can I kind of pull out of this little idea to create a bigger piece and to create like a bigger story. And so if you just look at the musical materials, they're I think very simple. in most of that piece, just maybe an arpeggio or a repeated note, a small rhythmic pattern, whatever. And the goal with that is to try to then develop that and spin it out over a longer form and just see how far can I take that? How much can I get out of this small little thing? So yeah, all those aspects, making the most of the small instrument and the to create a big palette of sounds, to create a big musical canvas, making the most out of the musical ideas. That all to me speak to this notion of an economy of mean. In the one sense, it suggests like scarcity. We only have these small things. But in the other sense, there's abundance, right? So it's finding abundance through scarcity, I guess, in a sense. It's like, I only have this one thing, but look what I can make with it. It can be so abundant even though it comes from so little.
Yeah. How should a composer finding a voice in terms of those large-scale work? How should we make the scale a little more interesting?
Yeah, that question of finding a voice, that's a hard question to answer. There's no formula. What I always talk about is I think you have to go through what you love. So, and it's easier said than done, actually. And I actually think it gets harder as you get older, because as you get older, you have these notions of what's cool, what's not cool, and maybe that can sometimes get in the way of what you really love. Like if you're honest with yourself about what you like, sometimes you like things that aren't cool. Sometimes you like things that maybe aren't popular. I mean, sometimes you like things that are popular, but it can cut both ways, but you have to be honest about your influences and what really speaks to you, right? And then you have to be curious. So it's more than just acknowledging it or seeing it. It's also being curious about it and say, okay, for whatever reason, this thing I think is so cool. I love the way it sounds. Then start asking yourself questions about it. Like, well, why is it that way? How does that work? Like, what other things might be like that? And just kind of follow your nose, down these paths of curiosity and love. And I think that if you can really commit to that, over time, the so-called voice, I just sort of think it happens. It's just not, I don't think you find your voice directly. I think you have to find it obliquely through these other processes of cultivating your influences over time.
You're also talking about this element of irony a lot in your composition, and the coding as well from other pieces, maybe from Mahler's even.
Yeah. Irony I love irony. I think that's absolutely present. And it's not that, I don't think my music is funny. I don't think it's like wink wink kind of like that. But I do think there is oftentimes a sense of remove, in the sense of like, this idea could be interpreted multiple ways. And I'm aware of that. And I think that's cool. And I'm just going to let it be that way. I'm not going to push it to be an extreme version of A or B. It can just sort of be in a space where maybe it's this, maybe it's that. And I like that ambiguity. And yeah, I think there's a lot of irony in Mahler, and I love that and that sort of music. I think it's just kind of part of who I am, my own sort of character, sense of humor, personality, I love making albums. I think they're old-fashioned. I don't think people listen to music that way very much anymore. They listen to them as songs. Maybe it's on a playlist. Yeah. Maybe it comes across social media one way or another. So it's oftentimes very deconstructed. You just hear a song, or maybe you even just hear like a 30-second clip. Like I think a lot of people, that's how they listen to music. But I'm sort of committed to this old-fashioned idea of an album. I think it's a really elegant and cool way to bring pieces of music together under a sort of a concept or a narrative or whatever structure it is, but to place them together. So I love that, and I've made a number of albums of my own music because I believe in that. So I would just say that if a student or a young composer really believes in that idea, you should go for it and still make that, even if it's not necessarily consumed that way. I think it's still great to put your idea out in the format that makes sense to you. But then the other part of your question, which is how do you put that together in a professional way, I think that's super important and it's something I really love. So I love recording my music. I will usually record in a studio with somebody, and I love the process of mixing and editing. So to me, that process is very engaging and very satisfying, so I get really hands-on with that. And I think there's few things more important to a composer than documenting your work in as professional a way as possible. Because to me, the work is not just the notes on the page, it's ultimately the sound that happens when it's played. So I think it's really valuable to invest your time and resources into making that the best way you can. Of course, now the technology is so accessible that you don't have to go to a recording studio. I mean, if you are savvy enough about it yourself, you can certainly make very high quality recordings on your own. For example, I did a film score to a documentary called The Real Charlie Chaplin, and we recorded that during COVID, basically. And because of some of the rules around, we couldn't have wind players in the same room as the string players, we had to record it in layers to a click track. Oh. Well, we did it to a click track. Most film scores are done to a click track anyway because it needs to sync up in a certain way. But because of the added addition of needing things to be isolated because of COVID, I ended up mostly multi-tracking that entire soundtrack. But I ended up leaving that process thinking that's actually a really cool way to record. I mean, it's very common in a lot of film music to do this sort of layered multi-track with a click, and certainly some pop music, that's common too, but it's not very common in like new music or classical music. But it depends on the type of music you're writing. But even music that's not super tied to a grid, you can craft like a kind of click that would allow you to layer. It can depend on the specific. But if you're writing music that has a pulse and is mostly in a grid, it can function on a click track, and you can record it that way, which actually makes it easier to do because you could just have a single person come to your home studio, for example, and just record them, and you can layer, and then you can create big ensemble works through this kind of layered process. So which I think ultimately makes it cheaper and more accessible. Or you can get a whole big group together and go to a studio and do that. There's so many ways to record now, and I think it is really worth young composers' time to figure out how to do that well, and to figure out a way that makes sense for them, makes sense within their budget, makes sense within the resources they have available. I think that's really important. Yeah.
Since you're bringing out this film music, The Real Charlie Chaplin, so let's talk about it, because a lot of composer students, they wanted to step into the film music world, but they're also being afraid of what's happening there and what's the challenges.
Yeah. So that project was really cool. It was very serendipitous. I didn't solicit it. I didn't seek it out. It kind of came to me. One day, I got an email through my website contact form from somebody saying, hello, I'm a music supervisor for film and we're interested in your music. Let me know if you want to talk about this. And I was like, yeah, this is spam. I just totally thought it was spam. And I actually didn't respond. And then they sent me another one, and then I did respond, and it took like a couple of exchanges for me to really believe this was for real. And it was for real. And so they asked to send samples of my music. They wanted to share it with the director and blah, blah, blah. And one thing led to another, and eventually they decided to hire me, which it was incredible because I was very clear that I was like, I have never done this before. I am a little bit afraid of being able to actually do this job. Are you sure you want to hire me? Which maybe isn't the best approach to getting a job, but actually I think it was good because I was honest, and I think they respected that. But it all worked out. They were very accommodating, and they sort of told me that one of the reasons they wanted to hire me was specifically because I wasn't a film composer, that the directors wanted a sound to their score that was maybe a little bit different than what you might get from someone who has more experience in that industry, right? So it turns out that what I was doing was what they wanted, and the fact that I didn't have experience was actually interesting to them. And the music supervisor, she was really wonderful, and she was also like, don't worry about it, I can help you get through the process, and she gave me some great advice. One of the things she said was like, think of this film score as you're just gonna write like 4 or 5 like main ideas, and you're going to do variations on them, and think of it like a suite of small little pieces. And they're going to be from anywhere from like 30 seconds to maybe as long as 3 or 4 minutes long. But it's going to end up ultimately being 20, 25 little teeny pieces, and they're all going to somehow relate to a couple of main ideas. And when she started explaining it that way, I was like, okay, all right, that's not crazy. Like, I could see that. I could see it being able to do that. And then she's like, she would talk me through like, I can help you with the recording process, and like how, we'll figure out, we'll help you. So it made me feel A, I wasn't alone, and B, I didn't have to figure everything out. So that made it a little less scary, and I took the leap, which I'm so grateful I did, because it was a really cool project and amazing process. Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess there must be a lot of preparations come beforehand. And I know that you have such a solid foundation about writing instrumentation. For example, the middle ground, you test out instruments with very high range and low range and composites middle range, because I noticed that a lot of the film students, when they step into the industry, they actually don't know how to write stuff. They learn this theory, but they still have to learn a lot of things.
Yeah.
So I guess knowing the instrument and knowing, like you said before, finding your own voice is very important, no matter if you are in a film industry or you're a composer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely feel like that project was so cool because I felt like it used every single skill I feel like I had ever learned, from playing the piano to orchestrating to composing to using Logic and MIDI instruments to like make demos, to producing scores, to recording sessions, to all of these skills I had to use to make that score. And it felt like this incredible synthesis of like everything I had learned throughout my entire career. And I mean, that was part of the challenge, but also part of what was so satisfying and cool about it. Yeah, so I don't know, I can't speak to what like the traditional film score background might be, because actually I have an opinion about just music creators in general nowadays, which is that those lines are blurry. I teach at NYU, and at our program, we have a big composition program, and in it is concert composition, screen scoring, and songwriting. And they're divided because to teach, you kind of have to make decisions, right? Because you're focusing, right? But I always tell students that once you leave school, you're just a person who creates music. Whether you think of yourself as a composer or a screen scorer or a songwriter, you are a person who creates music. And the more skills and flexibility you have to create music in different contexts, the more work you can get, the more opportunities you have. Of course, there are people who are more in one area than the other, but I think so many people, especially people that are younger and starting out, have a kind of adaptability and a flexibility that is really cool and admirable, I think, to be able to just, pivot like that. Yeah.
So fast forward to the music in 10 years, what do you think the AI plays into the music?
That's such an interesting question. I think AI is already a part of music. The degree to which AI is part of music depends on the type of music you're talking about. So, I think in the industry sense, like there's what people call production music, which is like, maybe you're making an ad and you go to a library and you say, it needs this type, this long and this mood and this tempo, and then you license it and you put it in. That type of thing, I think, is like already being colonized by AI, because AI is so good at taking a large data set and then imitating it, right? Maybe you don't, if you're looking at orchestra music, maybe AI isn't writing symphonies yet, although I do think that has happened, but maybe it's not too interesting quite yet. But AI is certainly in the software. You have AI that's doing mastering, that's doing production things. You have AI that could be like, just even like making like backing tracks if you're producing a song in like Logic. But I think what I'm interested as more of a concert composer, I'm only maybe just dabbled in this in my own process, is how could AI be part of the creative process in a more experimental way, right? I don't know the answer to that question, but I think there's opportunity for engaging AI in a way that could be really creative and still be part of very individual artistic expressions, right? Yeah. So, I imagine and hope it can be a tool like any other tool. When I talk about composition with students, I often talk about the tools we use, and not just know how to use those tools, but know how they sort of naturally can fit into different aspects of the creation process and use that to your advantage. So like, I wonder if AI can be yet another one of these tools that might allow you to create things in a certain way. But as an artist, I think you not only have to sort of master that tool, but also like really understand how that tool is part of your creative process and sort of use it creatively and effectively, right? You don't want it to use you. You want to use it, if that makes sense. Like sometimes I see composers and I feel like students, and I feel like the notation program is just using them. It's like they're just all pushed to write in a certain way because that's the default of the notation. But like, I never want your creative choice to be determined by the default of the program you're using. You know what I mean? It should be because that's the idea that makes sense for what you're trying to create. And so AI, I hope that it can eventually have a similar relationship, right? I think there's a lot of doom and gloom about AI, and it's definitely going to replace and change the landscape of how things are made. But I think the beautiful thing about an artist is that what we do is so individual. It's so intentionally weird, right? That I don't know if it can be replaced, because the whole point of making art is to make something that's unique or somehow different or somehow very personal, right? So, and that in a way is like the least AI possible, in my opinion. So whereas AI might become part of the process and might become part of the way we create things, I still think there's space to be highly personal with it. And I'm interested. I'm very curious to see what people can do with that. I don't know. Yeah, it's very new territory.
But really, thank you so much for this beautiful conversation. And I felt like as audiences, we tackle through the landscape and knowing how Roberts find out his own pathos and light out with this clean and unlighted world, and hope that all of you can find your own hidden pathos as well. So until next time.